Welcome to the intro to the Sabbats and the Esbats class for Covenant Corber Noir. My name is Rowan Firetongue. I'm going to be kind of going through this particular class. I hope you enjoy it. If you got any questions, and obviously you're probably in the coven, so you can just shoot us, questions via messenger or what have you. Just contact one of the other teachers or myself, one of the other, and we're going to go from there. So what the Sabbats and the Esbats are is basically holy days and so on and so forth. So really, when you're talking about a Sabbat, you're talking about a day of celebration. It's something that's going to follow the solar cycles and the seasons of the year. Sabbats are almost always going to be solar cycles and then order the seasons of the year. They're not going to be the moon cycles. That actually is Esbats, and we'll talk a little bit about that later. But all of them are some type of celebration. All of them is some type of just giving thanks to something, or celebrating, making merry, eating, feasting. All of that is done in a Sabbat. And that's been, on the other hand, is really more associated with working magic, wanting to bring about actual changes to your life. In that regard, you're going to follow the lunar cycle, and you're specifically usually going to do some type of magic which involves or revolves around which portion of the moon is going on, whether it's waxing or whether it's waning, or whether it's a new moon or a full moon, or what have you. So you're going to work magic in that regard and use the cycles of the moon as energy to do so. So when you move into the actual sabbats themselves, well, often they're associated with the cycles of nature. All right, you got to keep in mind that the people that we're talking about here, who came up with these celebrations and over time, over thousands of years, these are agrarian people. These are people who are tied to the land. They're farmers. They're having to deal with the cycles of nature mainly because they want to get food. I mean, when it's all said and done with, everything revolves around three things: how am I going to stay dry? Where am I going to fill my belly? And who am I going to spend quality time with? Right? Everything in life is associated with those three things. So all of the sabbats are associated with food, and they're dependent, like I said, on the seasons. But there's a whole. When you think of Europe, there's several different cultures within Europe that we're talking about here. It's not just one. It's not just the Britons, as King Arthur would say. We're not all Britons. There's Germans, there's the Visigoths, there was the Celts up north. There was the Scandinavians, which was a whole different culture. So there's several different cultures in the Indo-European area. And then this, by the way, the Sabbats that we're talking about do not include any other cultures. We're just talking about the Indo-European Sabbats in this regard. So many of the different cultures celebrated them in different ways, but they had a lot more in common between them than they did differences. The days of the year that they tended to celebrate were more or less the same because, again, you're talking about cycles of nature. You're talking about having to follow spring, following into summer, into fall, and into winter, and so on and so forth. So all of this is going to happen at roughly the same time of the year for everybody, at least in the northern hemisphere. So the celebrations, the days of the year that they were celebrating, were more or less roughly the same time period. Now, Coven Le Coulbre Noir tends to stick with the wheel of the year, and that's going to be the 8 holidays that you see here on these diagrams and these pictures in some capacity. So many scholars have viewed that the 8 holidays is really more of a modern convention. And what do I mean by that? Well, many of the European communities, they may have celebrated 4 or so holidays a year, but none of them, at least historically that we know of, were celebrating all 8 of them. On these days, though, we tend to celebrate all 8 of them, and the reason why is a lot of paths are different. There may be some paths out there that don't celebrate all 8 days. Coven Le Coulbre Noir, though, prefers to celebrate all 8. And the main reason for this, because honestly, we like to party. Now, not to say that we like to get, fish naked all the time, but we like to party. We like to spend time with each other. We like to fellowship. So therefore, we celebrate all 8 days. So the reason is there's 4 of the holidays that are associated with the seasons themselves, and this is Imbolc, this is Beltane, Lammas or Lunasa, and this is Samhain. Those are all associated with just the seasons themselves: spring into summer, into fall, into winter, and has to do with some type of harvest off of that. There's 4 holidays though that are associated with the cycles of the sun, the solar as the sun makes its path around the year. Okay, and in this particular case, you're talking about Yule, which is the winter solstice. You're talking about Astera, which is the spring equinox. You're talking about Litha, which is the summer solstice, and excuse me, you're talking about Maban, which is the fall equinox. All right, all four of those holidays are strictly tied to the sun. Yule being the shortest day of the year, Astera being an equal day, Litha being the longest day of the year, and Maban being an equal day again. So, generally, all the Sabbats again are tied to agriculture. They're tied to food. Why? Well, in Yule, we want light. It's the shortest day of the year. It's the longest night of the year. So, we're hoping and doing everything we can to appease whatever we need to appease to get light back in land for several reasons. One is freaking cold. Particularly if you think of where these people are, it's cold. It's no joke. Where we happen to be covering the Cobra Noir in southeast North Carolina, it doesn't get super cold in the winter, but it still gets a little frigid, right? So we want light because light grows food, and we're hungry, and we've been going through the last couple months now scraping our larders, and we can see that our supplies are running low, and we want food. All right, and so the en bulk, the days are getting longer, so we're hoping that food is something that can be grown again fairly soon. A lot of times, people will begin to start their seeds indoors in and around en bulk because for the old ways, this was kind of thought of as getting close to springtime now. I know we tend to think of spring as starting on March 21st in our modern conventions. But this is the days are starting to get longer, so people are starting to think of spring coming eventually. Also, this is the time period where the old people would go out and they would start mating their livestock, particularly their ewes, their sheep. They would start mating their livestock. And then you get to Ostera, and when you look at Ostera, you can understand why this particular holiday is associated with bunnies and with eggs. First off, your things are starting to be green again. Okay, and then on top of that, there's bunnies that are starting to come out, and then there's birds that are starting to fly around. So this was associated with food. And why is that important? Because we can go and we can steal eggs and we can eat, and we can snag some bunnies and eat and what have you. And then Beltane is when the old folks will take their cows out and let them start to graze on the grass that's growing. Once again, why? Because they want food. They want milk and they want, well, steak. Litha, the days are long, so some of the plants are picked, like some of your summer fruits and some of your summer vegetables. But we look at it as we're looking forward to the harvest that's going to come from Lammas, and that's when we start to harvest grain. All right, and that's when, or at least the European people started to harvest their grain. They would oftentimes use this to bake bread, or they would use this to make beer, as Friar Tuck would say from Robin Hood, well, Prince of Thieves, but really it was Prince of a bad English accent. And then you move into Maban, which is when the second harvest is taken in, everybody's even happier, and then you move on to Samhain when the last and the final harvest is taken in, and now everything around us is starting to die. So, as primitive people evolve, when you start off as a hunter-gatherer society, a lot of these cycles are not as impactful on your culture because one, you're moving with the herds, so you're following your food. But on top of that, because you're not staying in one place and you're not growing things, it doesn't really matter too terribly much if it gets colder and the days get shorter. At least as long as you can go out and hunt and gather some stuff, you're okay. Life is good. So as people evolve, though, and as cultures evolve, particularly after the agricultural revolution, things that are simple now start becoming complex again, or start becoming complex. The seasonal celebration becomes infused with meaning. What once was, oh my goodness, this is great, we can eat again, now since it's happening over and over and over again for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of generations, thousands of generations, we start to infuse meaning into that particular time of year. You start to develop gods and goddesses, or lords and ladies. And this leads to the high holy days themselves, which then, now we have these days set aside for feasting. We have these days set aside for merrymaking, for honoring the gods and goddesses of our culture, for drinking mead, because mead is awesome. It's just no other way to put it. For celebrating those who have come before us, those who have passed down to us all of their knowledge and all of their things. And this cycle just continues. Plus ça change, plus c'est la même chose. The more that things change, the more they stay the same. When it's all said and done with, even today, as complicated as our culture is, if you really were to break things down into what truly drives most people are driven by food, they're driven by finding shelter, and they're driven by companionship. Pretty much everything we do is in some capacity driven by those three things, and has been since humans were humans. Yule is the shortest day of the year. So we celebrate the coming of light into the world, the eventual where the days are starting to get longer. And this is important because one, that means it's going to get warmer because again, it's really cold. And two, the plants are going to start growing again. And when the plants start growing in, the animals are going to come out of hibernation. And then we can go kill things or pick things and we can have food again. We tend to, the Coven de Cobrador tends to honor the ancestors, and then also sometimes we'll honor the Oak King or Odin, as well as our kin around us. Now, the Oak King, I'm going to talk about that in more detail when we get to when we get to Litha. That's just one of the Celtic traditions, one of the Celtic paths, if you will, something we pull from there. And then sometimes somebody comes up with a ritual for us to do, and there's supposed to be a duel between the Oak King and the Holly King. And when the Oak King gets ready to duel with the Holly King, and the Holly King gets ready to duel with the Oak King, somebody dumps a whole bunch of glitter on the person who's playing the part of the Holly King, and the Oak King just can't because the Holly King stands up and it's just basically a big, huge, giant figure of shiny, glittery, silvery goodness. uh, and the Oak King just yields. But normally the Oak King's supposed to win at that time period. So we move on to Embog, and that's basically when we start looking at the animals going out and beginning to get pregnant. The animals going out and beginning to mate. They become more fertile at this time period, and this is traditionally celebrated with torches and bonfires because people are wanting to show the world how much light they want the sun to start bringing back into their lives. So they start, is in some respects you could think of it as sympathetic magic. Basically, by creating fire and light, we make the world make more light. All right. It traditionally marks this as the beginning of spring, more or less, for the old folks as well. So that's why they would start their seeds inside in a warmer environment, and then as the seeds were growing, eventually they would go out and plant them. So when you move into Ostera, now Ostera is an equinox. It's one of the solar holidays. So the night and the day are in equal balance in terms of how long each one of them is. This is also the time when you start seeing eggs. The birds have started laying eggs again, and rabbits are starting to come out of their burrows, and they're available for us to go out and consume. So a lot of times that's one of the reasons why eggs and rabbits are looked at as fertility symbols, because we're going out and now that spring is happening, this is what we're seeing, what people would see as they walk out their doors. And of course the flowers are starting to open up, so you can start seeing bees pollinating flowers and what have you. And then this often celebrates Estor, whose symbols are, again, this is a goddess. Estor is a goddess, and her symbols are eggs and of course rabbits. Sometimes they're killer rabbits, maybe even dynamite rabbits, and we may have been warned about these rabbits from a guy named Tim, but that's neither here nor there. Then we move into Beltane. Beltane is oftentimes known as May Day, and basically it's around the 1st of May. So it's the beginning of summer for the folks in the old ways. And May Day is often celebrated by folks dancing around, well, a pole. Why? Because May Day is a fertility celebration. It's when people are starting to, hope that they can have babies, if you will. After all, you got to remember, back in the day, thousands of years ago, we didn't have TV, we didn't have internet, we didn't have video games, we barely had board games. Really, what did you have to do? You ate, you drank, and you slept, usually with somebody. So, fertility. Move into Litha, which is midsummer, which is around June 21st, give or take. And this is the next of the equinoxes. This is another solar holiday. This is, by the way, the yellow biting demons of torture out military force. That's because where we did ritual this year, 2018, the deer flies, the yellow flies, were just horrible. They ate us up. So don't mind that. That has nothing to do with Litha. But it's the longest day of the year. Okay, just like Yule is the shortest day of the year, Litha is the longest day of the year. So in some traditions, this is where the story of the Oak King and the Holly King, which are two halves of summer and winter, if you will, are a whole. This is where the Holly King would seize power, marking the days are starting to get shorter now. The nights are starting to get longer, and we're starting to move into a winter time period rather than a summer time period. Sometimes seen as when the sun itself purifies the land of any impurities as well, because the sun is at its strongest at Litha. Moving into Lammas or Lunasa, some traditions celebrate the god Lu, which was a craft god from the Celtic path. Also marks the first day of harvest, usually for grain for Indo-Europeans in this particular case. That's why I said before, grain, and you can use that quote from Friar Tuck from Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves. Grain is usually the first thing harvested, so oftentimes fresh baked bread is used for rituals when it comes to Lanasa and Lammas. Again, it's the first of the three harvest rituals. The days are starting to get shorter here, but the harvest ensures that we can at least eat through winter and hopefully have enough seeds to start seeding next year. Maban is another equinox. It's the next equinox. You've got Stera, which is the spring equinox. You got Maban, which is the fall equinox. So this day is when day and night are in balance. It's the second fall harvest, so this is a festival of Thanksgiving. If you could think of Maban as one thing, think of everything that you do in the middle of November for Thanksgiving. For pagans, that's Maban. That's what we do. It's time to gather with friends. It's time to gather with family, and it's time to give thanks for the fact that we're starting to bring in all this food that hopefully is gonna keep us over through winter. For us, particularly, we tend to like to venerate our whites and the spirits of the land, because we tend to think of these whites and spirits as the entities, if you will, that help make everything around us fertile and help make everything around us bountiful. From this point until Aster, the nights are going to be longer. So many people view this as a time when the god or sun's power, if you will, is waning, is starting to diminish, which will eventually culminate to the god's death at Samhain. And that's the next one we're going to. So when you're looking at Samhain, this is the day, well, first off, it's the day when everyone's a witch because it's Halloween. And everybody can go out and they can dress up in whatever way they want to. And many of us who would love to dress in things like cloaks and more traditional old wear finally get to dust off those clothes and actually wear them in public. But it's the end of the harvest season. All right, everything around you in October, from the mid to late October on, nothing really truly grows unless it's an evergreen plant. Nothing really truly grows. Everything dies off. You got corn stalks and wheat stalks that are just sticking out of the ground, almost like skeletal fingers out of the ground themselves. You got vines that are bare of any fruit. You've got all the trees have loosed off all their fruit and most of their leaves, for that matter. So that's why people associate this as the time of death. Um, and for us, for us in Covenant Covenant, we particularly celebrate our ancestors at this time. The reason why they think of this as the time when the veil between life and death is the thinnest is, again, because everything around them is dead. The crops are dead, the vines are dead, the trees look like they're dead because they shed all their leaves and all their fruit. So this has to be the time of death for you're talking about, again, a superstitious people. So this would be the time when they would set a plate at their table for an honored loved one who has passed on, or at least they would give thanks to their honored loved ones who have passed on. And we, particularly for Coven the Corporate Noir, usually sometimes what we'll do is we'll tell stories of our ancestors, of those who have passed on, because by telling those stories, that person continues to live. That person, just for a moment, lives in everybody's heart because everybody hears a story about that person. And in that way, that's how we view, at least that's how I personally view, um, you know keeping someone alive for a long time, is that story. So, what's the recipe when it's all said and done with? What does a holiday look like as a whole? All right, so often some type of ritual is performed during which some deity specific to the occasion is invoked. Usually, we, at least cover in the Corban Noir, we honor our ancestors. And, we all sit down and we have a feast. We get food and we have merrymaking. We hang out. We have fellowship. We talk about things. Um, and there's usually some type of offering of food or drink that are given to the gods and goddesses and to the ancestors and the whites in the form of an offering bowl. Those are usually dumped out into the ground somewhere so that the nature around us, the various animals, can come and eat it up on behalf of the gods and goddesses and the ancestors and the whites and the kin. So, but here's the deal. All this time period, we never talked about Esbats. So, what are Esbats? Well, they're useful for performing magic, again, like I said before. Esbats can be during a waning moon, or they can you're basically following the path of the moon. So it's either waning or waxing, all right? And Esbats are basically specifically usually rituals that are celebrated on either a full moon, where the moon is thought to be in her completeness, almost as if you were looking at the triple goddess, the maiden, the mother, and the crone. This would be the aspect of the moon where the moon is the mother. She is in the fullness of her pregnancy and is about to give birth, if you will. The full moon is when you want to bring about powerful changes and start a transition of withdrawing, if you will. All right. And then you move into the new moon. The new moon is any time you want to start something new, because this is the maiden aspect of the moon when she has yet to become pregnant. So you want to start something new, you go here. When you want to start getting rid of the old, you start with a full moon. All right. So we're going to have a specific class on Esbats. That's why I don't want to go into it in too much detail, because there's going to be a class specifically on Esbat. Um, but we're going to talk about it both in the Esbats class as well as in the Rituals 101 class. But in the end, you just remember, when it's all said and done with, when it comes to a Sabbat, you're looking for food, you're looking for celebrating some type of fertility, you're looking to have drink, and you're looking to have fun. If you remember those four things, you will pretty much understand Esbats and Sabbats. You'll pretty much understand all the holidays of the year. Thank you for your time, and if you got any questions, just shoot me a message on Facebook. Otherwise, just go ahead and answer the test, and we'll go from there. Thank you very much, and have a wonderful day.